Gretzky 1, possibly Crosby 2, and then she's in a debate with Haley Wickenheiser and Marie-Philippe Poulin, which makes her like an arguable 3 or 2 in that range. Where would you rank her all time based on some of these names I just said?
Yeah, like that's, and it's so difficult because it depends on what your criteria would be, right? Because obviously soccer as a global game, much bigger than hockey.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another BTR podcast. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, our first ever returning guest, our favorite Vancouverite who lives in Toronto, so he kind of could stick it to the Maple Leaf fans over there for, I guess, the one outside of the one game. But he is the co-host of the Northern Football podcast with Ben Steiner and Alexander Gonje-Ruzic. He is the writer and analyst for Sportsnet and One Soccer. He's also on the Canadian men's soccer team coaching staff as a performance analyst in the past when John Herdman was the head coach. We're joined by Peter Galindo once again. Hey, Peter, how's it going?
Good, guys. Honored to be the first returning guest. And yes, I definitely do love sticking it to Maple Leafs fans. I think that's my favorite pastime.
Yeah. Welcome back. We would love to have you always. So we'll get right into it.
First off, U17 World Cup for Canada. All 3 games have been concluded. And unfortunately, they did not make history by winning a game
or drawing
a game. So I just want to get your overall thoughts on the tournament, like how the games went for you and just what happened.
Yeah, it's such I think a nuanced conversation because immediately whenever things don't go Canada's way at a youth tournament, the first thing people bring up is, oh, it's a talent problem. There are too many MLS Academy players. And look, to a degree, they're kind of right, and I'll maybe explain why in a bit, but there were some anomalies out there, right? Like I thought that Jivan Badwal, who of course you guys have family ties to, I thought he was excellent for most of the tournament. Gael de Montigny had his moments. Alessandro Biello in the half an hour he played against Spain, I thought looked pretty composed. He was solid enough defensively. Lazar Stefanovic, the fact that he actually got professional opportunities once or twice with TFC during the season with the first team, that is, it showed because he was quite composed and very poised out there. And then the professionals like TJ Tahid and Kevon Tavernier were also, you could tell, exposed to a professional environment as well. So there were players in there, even in an academy setting in MLS, who still stood out. Now, some players did better than others. That's going to happen when you have a tournament where you concede 10 goals and only score once. But really the 2 big issues that I think this all comes back to is a lack of camps. You could tell that all 3 of the opponents Canada played against had a clear tactical identity. They followed their tactical platforms. They knew exactly where players were going to be. And maybe to bring this back to the Canucks, you always hear Rick talking about playing with predictability. And predictability is exactly what a lot of these teams had. And that's a good thing because they're going to immediately know, hey, if I'm collecting the ball in the half space, so-and-so is going to be here on the overlap. I can just play him in immediately, and it's incisive. You don't really see that with any of our youth teams. And therein lies part of the problem. Now, the other problem as well is that sometimes the players just don't look entirely composed, and that could be because they're not prepared enough tactically. I think that's part of it for sure. But I do think that another reason for having more camps is to properly ID more players and maybe not entirely rely on just the 3 MLS academies. And the fact that you're seeing some CPL teams coming out with their own youth teams as well is going to help with that, because whoever the 3 MLS teams don't pick up, they're probably going to filter into the CPL teams, maybe with the League One teams across the country. And that could help. But look, Canada's such a vast country, you're not going to be able to get everybody, but that could help because the more camps you have, the more opportunities there are to identify players who could possibly figure into the teams. And then the more time you have together to train, to play games, perfect your tactical platforms, then you go into these tournaments not getting completely blown away by Spain or, failing to convert your chances against Uzbekistan or just getting the doors blown off of you against Mali. And some people will say, well, what about Mali? Because the infrastructure probably isn't there compared to what it is in Canada. It's one of the most impoverished nations on the planet. to that, I'd say a lot of these African nations do have a lot of superiority talent-wise. The problem lies between what happens when they finish under 17 level and then try to transition into the pros. They usually don't get exposure or opportunities to build on their potential. Whereas a lot of Canadian players might, especially with the CPL coming in. So that's what I'd say to that whole thing. It's that, if anything, it's exposed a wider issue that the CSA kind of finds themselves in a binds in, because they need to spend the money in order for all of their programs to reach their potential, but they don't have the spending power to do so. So to bring it out kind of all back into that one topic, that's really what the problem was when you look at this under 17 World Cup.
Yeah, obviously, like, sticking with the three games alone first, right? Like, obviously the two main parties that are at I guess at Indonesia playing is the coaching staff getting the team ready, and then the players, right? And then for me, the players, I agree with you 100% that, like, I'm not saying it's like, obviously when you're some of the players obviously have professional experience, have professional contracts, probably like TJ Tahid, and who impressed me, but obviously some players need to, like, are probably trying to get a contract, try to get scouted, because it is a World Cup at the end of the day. So, I'm not saying it's all on the players, because maybe some players should have, shown more energy, whether it be press or whatever the case may be. That side of things, I'll blame the players. But the coaching side obviously ties down to the camps. But, like, how do you assess the Canadian coach? I forget, Olivieri, isn't it?
Yeah, Andrew Olivieri. Yeah.
Andrew Olivieri, yeah. How do you assess him? Because were you happy with the subs he made? Because I thought TJ coming out was kind of surprising to me. Formation, for example, all over the place, because you could clearly tell that Mali, attacking wise, were insane. Like, they knew where everybody was. The 1-2 touches, the give and goes, the tic tac toes were all there. Defensively, you saw breakdowns, but then Canada could not convert. So where do you lie between the two sides of the players and the coaches in this case?
The Tahid substitution was puzzling. I want to assume he was hurt. Maybe that's why he came out managing the minutes. I don't know. It's always difficult to say when you're not there, but it was really, really weird to see him come out when he was really the one player, especially against Uzbekistan, who was actually causing a lot of problems with regularity. So that was something that was puzzling to me. And look, when you look just at the results, Olivieri has not gotten the job done at any level, really. And when you look solely at that, he probably shouldn't be the coach anymore, right? Because if you have, and especially when you look at the talent that he had at his disposal over the last few cycles, whether it's under 20 level, of course, Mauro Biello took over the last one because that also counted as Olympic qualifying. But before that, it was Olivieri leading the under 20s, as well as the under 17 level. You should be doing a bit more than that. The last World Cup was all right in 2019. They had a decent talent pool. They got a couple of pretty well-fought draws. They played Brazil decently well, which does say something. And even in that friendly against Argentina, by all accounts, based on the people I spoke to, like, the Canadian team did look decent. I don't know if it's a mental thing, and once you step into that tournament setting and you're dealing with the elements of the heat and all that, it just kind of frazzles you, but that is on the coaching staff to get the players prepared. So just because of that, I would say that Olivieri is going to be in trouble here. Now, I don't know if he ends up losing his job. I have no idea what happens with that. Because obviously he has to build relationships with players, and that does go a long way towards getting a squad sorted. But another subject as well that I feel did contribute to this under 17 cycle, and it reminds me of a couple of stories that I've heard and even personal experiences that I've seen. The Canadian player tactically, and when it comes to the quality of coaching that they receive, whether it's men's players, women's players, what have you, they're not at the same level as other countries. Like, I'll throw out Ireland as an example, because I spent some time in a couple of training sessions with a League of Ireland academy club at under 17 level. And you can see that the players are much more tactically nuanced. They get better coaching in that setting. And listen, the facilities they play in are not as good as some of these MLS academies. I think the quality of coaching is superior. In some cases across MLS, even at the first team level, players don't often get that level of tactical coaching, and it shows. And before people jump in and say, well, that's Ireland, that's a footballing nation, it's usually number 3 or 4 in terms of football participation when you look at all the sports in the country. Gaelic football and hurling are usually 1 and 2, and then it's competing with rugby as the third highest participation sport. So for a small country where you're still getting players poached by other sports, they still have the tactical nuance to be able to go out there and execute basic things. And that's something that I think the Canadian player really does struggle with. I'm not saying that's all in all a vary, of course. It's really a nationwide issue, which is kind of why you still say, well, is the talent really there? It's kind of a chicken or egg situation for me. But when it comes to Oliveri specifically, the results speak for themselves. And look, if he isn't under pressure, I would be kind of surprised.
You know, for me, that's not an excuse as well, because if you look at the USA, they have the NFL, they have like football, baseball, basketball, even hockey's on the rise there now with all the NHL American players there. So like, if you're looking at it that way, it's just like, oh, Canada's only hockey based or basketball based. I think that's kind of like BS in a way too, because like you mentioned with Ireland, it's like they have other sports they're worried about.
Exactly. And look, in Canada, soccer's still the number 1 participation sport. So to say that it's solely because of, other sports are pulling away from it, it's entirely incorrect.
Yeah. In your opinion, I guess, what's the ideal formation for, I guess, because I know Jovan mentioned to you last time. We spoke about how each level of whether U15, 17, 20, seniors, academy, whatever, have like a similar formation, similar tactics. What do you think is the ideal for Canada overall when you look through it?
Yeah, I do feel like, and this is difficult because there isn't a permanent coach in charge, but having the same tactical framework from the senior team all the way on down is the way to go. A lot of clubs do it this way so that when players move up in age groups or they go into the first team environment, they at least have a basic idea of what they're expected to do. So that is clearly the way it should go. There were some similarities from what you saw during the Herdman era in terms of 4-4-2 off the ball. You were playing with a center back 3 in possession, trying to get behind the wide forwards, behind the fullbacks, all that stuff. But it just didn't seem like there was much customization around that. It was almost very simple. It's like, all right, we're going to go route 1, try to get it as forward as quickly as possible, and just sort of rely on our creative freedom here to get something done, which isn't an awful strategy. But at the same time, when you're dealing with these young players who, yeah, some of them are familiar with each other, having come from the same academy, but as a collective, they're not going to be in sync with each other. So solely relying on that probably isn't the way to go, really.
Yeah, plus they play like different formations and tactics with, like, for example, Whitecaps have their own, maybe the TFC Academy has their own. Some of these guys are from Europe academies or MLS and American MLS academies, right? So it's like you need the camps to build like the thing, because like you said, when we watch the other teams play, it's just, you could tell the night and the difference between the chemistry and where players should be and stuff like that.
Oh, exactly. Like the amount of times I would see Spanish players, and I know this is an extreme example because Spain's an elite footballing nation, but just the recognition to know, okay, Alessandro Biello is going to step forward here. He's not going to track me, so I'm just going to run into this half space here in behind the fullback who probably won't be able to catch me because I have a running start. They kind of delay their runs a little bit to get on the end of the crosses properly. It's little things like that that really make the difference. And it wasn't just them doing it. Uzbekistan was doing it. Mali was doing it. And the fact that Canada can't really seem to do that in attack, especially defensively, there were times when they were kind of okay in that regard, but it was the attacking improvisation and just the overall attacking sequences that lacked.
Just finishing off the World Cup here. First of all, I just want to ask, did you think Biello deserved a red card?
No, not at all. I thought that was completely, like, I was stunned when they even went to VAR to check it. Like, I don't know how that sort of a challenge can warrant getting you a red card. And not only was that detrimental because Canada went down to 10 men, you're also losing one of the pillars of the team, because without Biello, you kind of saw it against Uzbekistan the very next game. Tyler Londino, he had an okay game, but there were times when he kind of misread situations and didn't seem to have that chemistry with Jivan that clearly Alessandro would have. And they both, in a way, suffered as a result.
And then just finishing off here, obviously you did mention some players before, but just any players that just stood out for you that you want to show love to because they performed well.
That might have recognition and potential U20 or even senior men's team.
Yeah, TJ for sure stood out, and you could see what the pro experience did for him, just in terms of the comfort level he had, the confidence he had, cutting inside and really at times dictating games too. Now, not for the entire game, but for 10, 15-minute spells whenever Canada had control. I thought he looked really good. I'm not just saying this because I'm on your guys' show, but I thought Jeevan looked excellent against Spain. The amount of times he was taking on men and somehow maneuvering through 2 or 3 players trying to close him down, and he'd get through, he'd fire in a cross, or he'd play in Kevon Tavernier into the box. Magnificent. And the fact he had to adjust to a new partner in a double pivot, which is not easy to do, because not only are you adapting to a teammate that you maybe don't always start with or play with, the double pivot is so it's such a finicky thing, because you have to be able to time your movements. You have to know, okay, if I push forward here, you're going to track the man here, and all these other little details that I feel go unnoticed. So given what he had to deal with, I thought he did very well. And Lazar Stefanovic as well. I thought he anchored the back line pretty decently. I understand they conceded 10 goals. Thought in possession, he was pretty comfortable. Those would be the 3 that I'd look at in terms of players who have high potential, in terms of they could end up having very good careers. I wouldn't be surprised if, because obviously Lazar's in the first team picture a little bit at TFC, TJ's getting experience with Vancouver. I wouldn't be surprised if Jeevan ends up going into a preseason squad with the Whitecaps, maybe impresses there, possibly gets an extended look, a la Ali Ahmed, really, and maybe challenges for a spot, especially with a couple of spots in the midfield opening up next season. So it could be an exciting few months for him.
Okay, let's move on. I know we touched on the lack of chemistry is because of the lack of camps. Obviously, we know the behind the scenes has a factor towards that. If you were in charge, I think we asked you this last time, but now after seeing what happened with U17, and we mentioned some solutions on how it should be matched up from the seniors all the way to U15, what would be your potential fix to this whole situation? Because at least the one positive from this thing is they at least made the World Cup. The U15s did not qualify. I don't know about the U20s. I'm not 100% sure with that one. And then obviously the pros, they have their own drama going on as well,
Yes.
but they're more prepared, I guess you could say. But if you were, I don't know, the head guy, what would be your ideal solution to getting everybody on the same page and hopefully seeing what Mali and Uzbekistan and Spain were doing?
Or your first step, basically, to fixing it.
Yeah, I think cooperation is the first one, because obviously when they hired the general secretary and then the head coach, I think everybody has to work in conjunction in terms of the hiring of the youth coaches after that. Now, if the budget is there, of course, that's always the key asterisk here. And then work on, and this is kind of what they did under John at times, you could see it, just working on the same page to ensure that the framework is there from top to bottom. It's so imperative, because you see so many of the top nations do this. Germany does it, England does it, France, Spain. How many times do you go out and watch these teams from senior level all the way down to the under 17s, and you see all the same similarities? So that's clearly step number 1, because you would solve so many problems by ensuring that there is a tactical philosophy there before you even take charge. So if you don't get those opportunities in camps or in games, at least you kind of know, generally speaking, what you have to work with. Now, obviously, it's probably not going to serve you well come tournament time, because you won't have match practice to perfect it, but that's 100% the first step towards getting some sort of consistency at the youth level.
After seeing this performance, last thing before we move on to the senior team, well, I guess we'll lead to the senior team here. After seeing performances like this at the World Cup stage, how concerned are you for the senior team? Because the grassroots aren't as successful as it is right now.
That's something that I think a lot of people are starting to look at now, and it's interesting. Now, I don't know what the trends are going to look like in the next couple of years, and COVID did affect this, but over the last 5 or so years, participation has gone down in Canada at the youth levels, at the grassroots levels. And one of the reasons why we have seen such a boom over the last 5 years or 10 years is because all the players who were born sort of in that late 90s to early 2000s period, it all coincided with the participation boom of the mid 2000s, right? Because look at how old Fonzie would have been when he started playing, or how old Tajon Buchanan, Alistair Johnston, Kamal Miller. They all would have been in like that 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old range when that boom began. And now you're seeing the fruits of that labor being bared. Also, immigration comes into it because you have so many dual nationals who are now eligible playing overseas in Europe, which is great to see. But if the participation rates don't climb up, that could be a real issue come sort of 2030 or in the 2030s, especially because when you have more pathways coming with League One Canada, with the CPL, with MLS, etc., the opportunities are there. It's just about having the players to be able to fill the gaps.
Okay, so let's move on to the senior team now. Before we get to the Jamaica Nations League game here, you got to see one game of Mauro Biello. Now, it's obviously one game. Your early thoughts, and how about his roster selection in that previous game against Japan and how it is now?
Hard to judge, considering it was the first game for the A squad in 4 months together. You had to fly to the Far East, deal with a 12-hour time difference, jet lag. Of course, you don't have much training time either. And you're playing against a very informed side in Japan. They've blown the doors off of every team they've played against over the last 6 to 8 months. So all that considered, they had a decent opening 35, 40 minutes maybe. And then once that first goal went, well, really the second goal, once that went in, then all hell broke loose. And it was individual mistakes, something that I don't think it'll creep into them against Jamaica, because a lot of those mistakes I feel were symptoms of just not playing together for a long time, which kind of leads into why I think Mauro went with the veteran heavy squad. You don't have much training time to work with. You're dealing with a group that is in a state of flux right now because there's no permanent head coach. There's a lot of uncertainty within the federation, which I'm sure factors into this. And you have 2 games against a quality opponent, probably the fastest rising team in CONCACAF, that you have to win in order to get into Copa America, to get into a Nations League semifinal and fight for another trophy come March. So I can understand why he went with the veteran heavy group, especially when you consider that you're not going to have a lot of time to train together. And when you bring in guys who have the chemistry together, have the familiarity tactically, you can maybe tweak 1 or 2 things on the edges and not have that kind of come into it. I think that's the way to go, because you saw what happened at the Gold Cup with 7 uncapped players getting called up, 4 of them first-time call-ups, and the other 3 were guys who were only brought in for the first time in March. That was Tom McGill, Victor Loturi, and Dom Zator. And it took a couple of games and really a couple of weeks for everybody to get onto the same page, come that Cuba game and then that USA game, which is kind of when we peaked as a group. But it took countless hours of hard work on the training ground, in games, to get everybody onto the same page. And that's why I understand why Mauro went this way.
All right, so you just alluded to it. Jamaica game is going to be a big one. So what are your 3 keys, I would say, for Canada that they need to hit on in order to win this tie? It's 2-leg, right, I believe?
Yes. Yeah, it's 2 legs. And it's interesting, too, because the Kingston area is going to get pelted by heavy rain over the next sort of 48 hours, I think, at the time of recording. So the pitch is probably not going to be very playable. Wouldn't be shocked if Canada's happy just to see out a 0-0 and kind of come back to BMO Field, where they can maybe open it up a little bit more and maybe take it to Jamaica a bit. But when I look at the 3 keys, having dived into the data and the recent trends from this Jamaica squad, there are really 3 areas that I think are going to be ones to watch here from a Canadian perspective. The first one is the Mikel Antonio influence, because he's often someone who will receive diagonals from the center backs, cushion the ball. He'll kind of drop into those spaces between the lines of the midfield and the defense. He'll kind of swing it into an overlapping right back or into usually Bobby DeCordova-Reid is the right winger, one of those 2 guys. And then they kind of try to find the back post with their crosses, or they just try to play through you with the technically gifted players that they have, right? Because that's a Premier League caliber front 4 that they have. So that's the one thing I'd look at, really just that right side in general, because that tends to be where they focus a lot of their attacks in open play. Secondly, attacking set pieces. They've given teams a lot of problems since the start of the Gold Cup off of set pieces. Of course, they scored against the US in their Gold Cup opener. Off a set piece, Damian Lowe is usually quite a threat in those positions. They average about 0.35 expected goals per 90 minutes off of set pieces, which is quite high. So that's something that Canada will have to watch out for, especially when you consider just how well the US did in that Nations League final off of set pieces. So don't be shocked if, say, Stephen Vittoria starts with Derek Cornelius as the left-sided center back. That wouldn't shock me at all, just to combat those aerial problems. But then on the flip side, Jamaica does give a lot of space in behind their right back, and a lot of the goals and the big chances they've conceded have come through playing through the space behind their right back. And Damian Lowe is not very good at defending aerials in his own box. As good as he is attacking set pieces, not very good defending in the air in his own box. So that could be an area where Kyle Larin, for example, could really capitalize on. You can maybe capitalize with late runs into the box, because Jamaica's back four tends to kind of drop very deep once the ball gets progressed closer to the byline. So there's going to be space to exploit there when you look at it from a Canadian perspective.
Yeah, no, it's important to obviously win this, because just to your point earlier, you want to face the toughest competition. And what better way than getting into the Copa and playing Argentina, whether it be with or without Messi, still powerhouse. Brazil, Uruguay, Colombia, Ecuador is decent, and all these guys, right? So, obviously, the pressure's on there as well, because now if they don't make it, it's like, are they gonna only have one camp like they did against Japan, and then get into a World Cup or a Gold Cup? And
Yeah, well, and that's something that John's been screaming from the rooftops for the last few months he was in charge, right? It's that we need more matches against World Cup caliber opposition so that we don't have a repeat of what happened in 2022, where we get onto that big stage and we kind of, for a variety of reasons, we just don't maybe reach our potential, right? Whether that's just a lack of killer instinct in both boxes, or Croatia adjusts and starts wrestling control from the game slowly. How do we adjust to that mentally and tactically as well? These matches help you prepare for those moments so that when you are presented with it again come 2026, this group will already know right away, hey, this is what we do in this situation. Or they get one half chance in the opposition's 18-yard box and they put it away, right? And they get that decisive goal. And even if it's not against a Brazil or Argentina, Ecuador is still World Cup tested with world-class players. Same with Colombia. Same with Uruguay. You don't have to play against the big two of CONMEBOL to get that practice. Pretty much any team in what is, in my mind anyways, the toughest confederation to qualify out of, that's going to be more than solid enough match practice for this team, if they can get there.
So, I don't know if you're a prediction man, but your prediction, will they get it done against Jamaica?
I think we do. I'm going to say 0-0 in Kingston, and I am going to say I'm bordering between a 2-0 or a 2-1. I don't think we'll keep two clean sheets in a row, just with the caliber of player Jamaica has. I'll say 2-1 at home. We'll make it a bit nervy. We'll get it done, but I do think we end up qualifying, because more often than not, we do have the quality to get it done in CONCACAF. It's just a matter of, finally, for the first time in a while, we're going to be playing against a team not named USA or Mexico, who may have the quality to punish us if we make a mistake or two.
Okay. Moving on. Christine Sinclair. Obviously, I think it's been a month now. She has officially called it a career internationally. So I think she has, I'm not sure if she said one more year, but she has. So those people that do want to watch her, she's still playing for Portland. But internationally, Canadian, your reaction to the retirement, and any memories or stories you may have dealing with her, or maybe you've experienced as a fan in person or meeting her or anything like that.
I think just the one thing you can say is that the way that she announced her retirement, or the way the retirement came out, it's just so sinky, because she never wanted to be the center of attention. Anytime she was presented a question about breaking records or, becoming the greatest player of all time and the greatest international goal scorer of all time, she'd always kind of cringe a little bit and sort of like shyly look away from the person talking to her about this, because she just never wanted to be herself, right? And that's one of the things that people loved so much about her, is that she really was a selfless superstar in so many ways. And she helped pave the way too for a lot of not just young girls out there, but just young players in general, to make everybody believe that, hey, guess what? A Canadian can achieve great things and set world records and become an internationally recognized athlete, in the most played sport on the planet. So like her legacy is going to be untouched. I don't think there's going to be another one like her for a while at the very least, because there's always generational talents that come through every once in a while. But someone like her who's going to be really the greatest player ever in women's soccer, it's going to be difficult to top that. And it's something that, you know, memories galore. Everybody remembers 2012. Everybody remembers her finally getting that elusive gold medal that I think she deserved 9 years ago if they didn't get screwed over in that USA game. So I'm glad that she at least got that in the end, because she deserved that plus so much more.
You're in town for BC Place, right? I'm assuming you're going to go to the game.
Yeah. And I'm also looking at going to the game in
yeah.
Langford as well.
Oh, yeah, because we're going to. I'm like, okay, me and him are like, what opportunity are we ever going to get to see a GO.A.T retire in person? So we're obviously, hopefully we run into you there. I don't know, but obviously we have plans to do something in person. But we're going to be at the game as well. So they had the upper bowl, I think, half open and pretty much getting sold out instantly as well. Atmosphere reaction, it's going to be insane, right? I think personally she starts, and then we'll get off around like the 80th minute, because I know currently she gets on in the 80th or 70th minute, but I think it'll be flipped just because it's her last game.
No, she has to start.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, potentially. Like I think in some way she's gonna get that moment to say goodbye to the fans. All the attention's gonna be on her. She's probably gonna hate every single second of it, but she's just gonna have to embrace it because she's retiring. Like the GOAT is retiring. This is what you do. And I almost feel like too, it's almost like this is a very fitting way to retire, because you're not just going out against some minnow out there in a game you're expected to win. Like this is against an elite team, one that blew the doors off of you at the World Cup. So this is going to serve as really quality match practice for the team, but then also you're going to be paying your respects to the greatest of all time at the same time. And look, in this system, she does still have a fit. So it's not like she's going to be out there and just be part of the furniture. She actually will, you imagine, contribute in some ways too. So this is kind of the best of both worlds.
Okay, so before we move on to the European and other reactions, we have a little fun exercise. I know Joven brought one last time when he did the whole co-ed World Cup or co-ed team. This one, we're going to just determine where Christine Sinclair ranks all-time athlete-wise. So obviously, quickly with soccer, you just mentioned men and women's side. I don't think anyone touches her. With all due respect to Atiba Hutchinson, Christine Sinclair's obviously stats and like what she's done for the game has been blown through the roof, right? From currently in the women's side, I don't think anyone's close. I know Jessie Fleming is the one you could say watching wise, you could say. But on the men's side, Alphonso Davies' talent, but we'll see what happens. Do you agree with that? That right now no one's touching her for a while at the soccer level for men and women?
1000%. Like Fonzie could be someone who could reach that, but he'd have a long way to go. He's getting there with all the trophies he's winning at Bayern, and then with those Real Madrid links as well. Maybe he moves there and ends up going another level, but for sure, it's Sinky and really nobody else comes close.
Okay, so a couple of episodes when she announced her retirement, me and him, Joven, we were looking at to see where she ranks all time. We'll go hockey last because that's where most of the names come from. The names that we came up with multiple sports, golf was Brooke Henderson. I think on the female side, she's probably top 5, but Sinclair probably tops her. Tennis is pretty young right now with Bianca Andreescu, Leila Annie Fernandez, Denis Shapovalov, and Felix Auger-Aliassime. Swimmers, we have Penny Oleksiak and the rest of the crew there right now that's killing it in the Olympics. Decathlon, Damian Warner, who I believe is very underrated. UFC, Georges St. Pierre, Canadian legend that way. From the runners, we have Andre DeGrasse currently, but with Donovan Bailey from back in the 96 and that relay team as well. Baseball is Larry Walker. I know there's not much there. Football, there's literally no one, I think. Basketball, you have Steve Nash as an argument, but then I feel like because the Raptors more propelled it in Canada, because we're judging this based off of legacy as well, not just stats. Like to the point of Alphonso Davies, we have Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Kia Nurse, I guess, from the women's side of things. Soccer, we already mentioned, and hockey is where we have it. Gretzky 1, possibly Crosby 2, and then she's in a debate with Haley Wickenheiser and Marie-Philippe Poulin, which makes her like an arguable 3 or 2 in that range, where would you rank her all time based on some of these names I just said?
Yeah, like that's, and it's so difficult because it depends on what your criteria would be, right? Because obviously soccer as a global game, much bigger than hockey. But when you're
Yeah.
looking at the impact they've had in Canada,
Yeah.
you would still, yeah, third is probably fair, to be honest, because Crosby and Gretzky are the two that you automatically think of in terms of who did Canadians idolize growing up. And it would usually be, especially now that Crosby's getting older, it's one of those two, right? And now Christine Sinclair, I think after that, especially once she retires and you're going to start to see even more players coming through, she might start to challenge, but third is probably it, because Donovan Bailey, yeah, like that's a good shout. George St. Pierre is a really good shout, because any Canadian MMA fighter who comes through, it's like, oh, who was your idol growing up? Oh, it's GSP.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it would probably third. I think you guys are spot on.
Yeah, because we based it on, I think, legacy plus stats. So, like, obviously, we know McDavid, who knows where he'll end up finishing up, but that's not right now. And then, yeah, because, like, to show love to Marie-Philippe Poulin, who's killing it in the women's hockey game, as well as Haley Wickenheiser, we're like, okay, we might as well put all three of them together. And I know for a fact people are going to say Crosby and Gretzky.
Yeah.
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 Oh, yeah, no, we agree with you there
Trailblazers
then.
are
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say you guys are pretty close.
Sure. Perfect. All right, we're gonna move on to the European side of things, but before we go into that, we've seen you tweet something after a Whitecaps game, the last Whitecaps game, about officiating. So,
Yes.
and it's not just the MLS that's brutal. Obviously we're Manchester United fans, so we watch the EPL a lot, and there's a lot of. Yeah, we'll get to Man United in a second, but we've seen the Liverpool VAR drama. So your overall reaction to the officiating across all leagues right now, how very inconsistent and brutal it is, in our opinion, at the moment. And they have a tough job, we know that, but we have to criticize when we need to.
I just think that a lot of teams, or not a lot of teams, sorry, a lot of referees now, they're so reliant on VAR to kind of bail them out that I feel like referees are too afraid to make a definitive decision at times. At least that's what it looks like in Europe. Because the amount of times I've seen a certain incident in real time happen, and I'm like, oh, that's for sure a booking, or that's for sure a foul, or that's not a foul, and it ends up going the other way. I'm thinking to myself, well, what could you have possibly seen there? And I know a lot of current and former referees also bring this up as a possible conflict, because they all say, well, in the back of their minds, are they thinking that VAR might show me up here, or that I might look like I'm an idiot? Because at least pre-VAR, whenever a referee would make a decision, it was a case of, well, that decision clearly wasn't right when we look at it in hindsight, but it was his choice. He had no resources. We just kind of got to go with it. It almost seems like it's gotten worse in that regard since VAR has come in, because they just keep changing the criteria, the constant rule changes year on year, especially with handballs and what constitutes double penalty in terms of a red card plus a penalty, and just all these things that just make it so confusing. Because initially it was brought in to just be clear and obvious errors. We saw at the 2018 World Cup how effective that was, and it's just gotten progressively worse since then.
Not before we get to the Liverpool reaction that you may have, but how much is it the freeze frame and the slow down that makes it just 20 times worse?
Yeah.
For example, Marcus Rashford, it wasn't like he definitively stamped the guy, and I think was it the Copenhagen game, the Champions League game.
Correct.
And then Liverpool did the same thing in the Europa League, and they
Biello as well, right? Like,
yeah.
And when you look at the play, to me, Biello slipped and it hit the guy's leg. But when you look at the freeze frame, it's going to show Biello's
stamp, like literally studs up on the ankle, right?
Yeah.
So is that the main factor that's causing outrage?
I would say so. Yeah, because it goes with any sport too. You slow down anything and you play it in slow motion, like how much worse does it look when you slow it down as opposed to real time? And that's something that I think that's like one small tweak that I think every VAR crew could use. Is just watch the incident again in real time. Sure, if you want to look at it in slow motion just to see kind of what happened during that moment that you maybe didn't catch, but watch it in real time and then judge it based on that. I feel like it just becomes a bit too letter of the law and too much by the book. And I know that's weird considering these are laws of the game, but you also have to have a feel for certain things. You have to use context at times, especially in a sport that is just so fast all the time. And it's the same thing with hockey. It's the same thing with any sport that has such a fast pace to it, whether it's basketball, hockey, football, what have you.
Your reaction to the Liverpool VAR audio?
You know what? It's one of those, like, you're speechless. Like,
Yeah.
you're not surprised, but you're still like, it. You know that meme where you're like, our expectations were low, but holy,
Yeah.
what? Like, it's exactly like that. And it just makes you realize, like, wholesale changes need to be made for this. If you wanted to bring in VAR to clean up the clear and obvious, just go back to that. Bring it in for those situations. If you want to look at it for marginal offsides and you want to look at it for, like, oh, maybe there was like a foul in the build up 40 seconds before this goal actually happened that actually wasn't at all consequential to what ended up happening, then in my opinion, the game is gone.
Yeah, because, like, you know how, because you watch hockey, you're a Canucks fan. When like, it happened recently, when JT Miller, I think, scored in that, I forgot which game it was. They said it was no goal because they thought it hit the post, and then the horn sounds. In this case, the audio was like, "Oh, it's too late. The game started." You could just be like, "Okay, no, stop. That should be a goal because that was not offside." Like, how hard is it to say, "Oh, just come, like, correct the error"? Essentially, like, that was the whole point of it.
That's it. And part of it too, and the NHL has a massive problem with this, especially, but so does the PGMOL, like the Premier League Refereeing Association, and all that. They don't hold the referees entirely accountable. Like, look, obviously you don't want to see them get abused and have death threats sent their way, and in some cases actually get hurt. But you also need to hold people accountable. Like, if we don't do our jobs well, guess what? We're going to be held accountable. We're going to be reprimanded in some way because of that. And in some cases, you do see referees get relegated to the lower leagues of England and whatnot, and maybe they're banned from refereeing Premier League matches for a couple of weeks, but then they're right back into it, doing the same thing over again. So I think in order for it to work, there has to be some give and take here in terms of, yes, referees do have a difficult job. We do have to help them. We've suggested some possibilities as to how we could do that, but also hold them accountable when they actually do make mistakes, so that if a situation like this happens again, then maybe they might think twice and go, okay, well, this happened last time. With the context I now have, I can make a more informed decision.
Yeah, last thing with that, to your point, Anthony Taylor, right?
Yeah.
He got demoted to, I think, championship.
Yeah.
Had a brutal call, and then got promoted to do the Chelsea Tottenham game or whatever was it? Whoever they played last weekend.
They played last, yeah.
Yeah, he got promoted to do that game. Not even like a lower, like, I don't know, Wolves versus whoever's up, Burnley or something, right?
Like
it was like
when all the eyes are on you.
Yeah. So
wild to me, yeah.
Like, you did the right thing. You relegated him. Does a brutal call, but you promote him. It made no sense.
Yeah, and again, that's part of the problem we have, right?
Yeah. Okay. Enough bashing referees here, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
let's close it out with some quick fire European reactions. You mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the GOAT talk. Alphonso Davies, Madrid rumors. How much do you buy it, and do you think he will end up being a Real Madrid player come next season?
I'm slowly starting to buy it more, because when you look at the turmoil within Bayern Munich, apparently there's a little bit of infighting. There's a bit of uncertainty in terms of, like, who's really in charge, who's making the decisions. And also just the fact that maybe Fonzie thinks, you know what, a change of scenery could help me here. And Real Madrid is Real Madrid. Like, Bayern's obviously a massive club. We know this. But Real Madrid is that one club that I think every kid idolizes playing for one day. Like, even David Beckham, who was a childhood Manchester United fan, we saw it in the documentary. He was like, look, I didn't want to leave United, but it's Real Madrid. And I think Fonzie might be in a similar situation with this, which, look, if he goes there, that'd be amazing. I mean, him and Vinicius on that same flank, it would be something. That's for sure.
Hey, and if they convince Jamal Musiala to join them with Jude in the
Oh,
middle.
God,
yeah. Oh my, that's over. Like, it's genuine.
Fold the Champions League if that happens, honestly.
Yeah.
Just
don't even
give it
allow
to
them to qualify.
No, exactly.
Man United fans here, so for obviously before when we talked, they're like, you have some time, don't need to overreact. But now we got a little bit more games under
under our belt.
Under our belt now. So what do you think the Manchester United situation is right now, and do you believe that Ten Hag should be fired or not?
I do, in complete danger here of sounding like Gary Neville. It does go back to the top. right? And
Oh,
you're
we agree with
seeing
that.
these reports come out, right, in terms of how this takeover business kind of affected things at the club, and the players aren't all there mentally, right? It's not too dissimilar to what the Canadian players might be dealing with no general secretary, no permanent head coach. Obviously, a slightly different situation, but still, there's no certainty at the top. So it kind of makes you wonder, well, what's really going to happen? And I'm sure that does affect performance. But at the same time, when you look at the underlying numbers, they are underachieving slightly when it comes to their attack, but then they're also overachieving when it comes to their defense, which I find fascinating because all the talk earlier was about how Andre Onana was maybe not up to the standard and all this. He's starting to come back into form and playing like the Andre Onana we saw at Inter and at Ajax as well.
Yeah.
But the attack just isn't firing. And look, whether it's to do with injuries, whether it's to do with the players just not maybe being all there mentally, I don't know if firing another coach is really the solution here because it's happened so many times. We've seen, and it's weird because they always have solid first seasons, sometimes decent second seasons, and then if they stick around a third season, that's when it falls off. And we're now starting to see Ten Hag comes in, has a slow start, solid first season in the end. Second season, you're supposed to progress, and it just hasn't happened. Maybe now with Ineos starting to, take it over and they're maybe this is starting to rest a little bit, we'll start to see a bit more consistency, but it is wild to me because you look at the squad and you think, it's not a half bad 11 for sure. Yeah, there are some holes with it, and you have a Rasmus Højlund who has basically 70 professional games under his belt, which is maybe less than ideal, but you also have to give him a chance to play. Like, why are you taking him off early in matches? I don't understand, especially when he's really your one main threat and he's getting into quality positions. He's your one best chance to score. Why are you taking him off the pitch? Yeah. So Ten Hag isn't entirely, not at fault here, but there are other extenuating circumstances, as there always seems to be with United.
Yeah. Game by game, we've said it many times too. It's like, yeah, Ten Hag deserves his criticism, but there are a lot of injuries as well. And he's one of the quickest managers. I think he is the quickest manager to get like 30 wins or something in Man United history. And then, yes, he's having one of the worst this year. But at the same time, like you said, the drama. And for what? You're going to fire this guy and bring in, I don't know, Julian Nagelsmann or whoever else might be available. That's his level. Yeah. Like, it's going to be it's the same story over and over. There's no point.
That's it.
Let him. And then, yeah, I agree with the Ten Hag. Sometimes his tactics, like, why is he playing Anthony so much? And why is he not playing this guy? We could criticize him, but I still, at the same time, I still think he's fine. Like, the players, in my opinion, at times don't play for the, the quote unquote badge and the passion and type of thing that shows as well.
Yeah. Oh, and that's part of it for sure. But yeah, I mean, some of the selection decisions too, like why not give Facundo Pellistri a run out over Anthony if Anthony isn't getting it done and he has these domestic abuse allegations hanging over him, right? Like just for that alone, give someone else a chance. And Pellistri, the odd time he's been called upon, like I've liked what he's done. He just hasn't played consistently enough to really show anything.
Yeah, it's just that's what will get him fired, if anything. If worse comes to worse, that's what's been called. But moving on. The Champions League. Obviously, I know you're still sticking by your Man City. I know you're probably still sticking by the Man City prediction.
It's an easy pick.
But the group of death is what I want to talk about. It is living up to the name because each game something different is happening. And the group of death is the PSG, Newcastle, Dortmund, and AC Milan group right now.
Yeah.
So reaction to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been. Look, anytime you see that group of death called out, you're always thinking to yourself, oh, okay, like what's really going to happen? But the fact that they're all still in with a shout with a couple of games left is wild to me. Now, I think Newcastle's probably going to be someone who you look at and think they're not going to make it just because they're hitting those injuries and they're starting to see what happens when you're dealing with playing these big matches from a Tuesday or Wednesday into a Saturday or a Sunday, and you maybe don't necessarily have the depth and quality to cope with it. Whereas even a Dortmund has it. We all know PSG does with their mega billions. And AC Milan, they have some young pieces who've kind of come in there and really impressed, especially Malik Thiaw and the like at center back. So it's one group that you look at and like it's appointment viewing. Like no matter who plays, you look at it and you're like, okay, I got to watch both games today. Like even if it's on delay, I have to check them out.
Yeah.
And if I had to pick a favorite to come out of it right now, look, PSG have been slightly unlucky. I feel like they've been the dominant team in all 4 of their matches. And if I had to pick a team that would win the group, it probably would be them. If I had to pick if I had to pick who comes second, it's hard to say. Dortmund is just so porous defensively. I don't know if they're going to get through. I feel like Milan, just because they kind of have that defensive organization and they have the history of being able to grind out 1-0s under Pioli, they're probably my favorite to come second, but who knows? Because so far, who would have thought that it would be 7-6-5-4 for all 4 of those teams?
Yeah.
And then Newcastle beat PSG
exactly.
out of all the teams. Yeah.
Your reaction to that? Your reaction to Sandro Tonali, since you mentioned Newcastle, that betting scandals, like we saw it in the NHL recently, we've seen it in the NFL, but yeah, your thoughts on this whole betting thing and how is it hypocritical because the betting sponsors are everywhere as well, to a certain extent?
Yeah.
Like, don't bet on your sport, but yeah.
Of course, yeah, and I think that that's something that that's where you hit the line, right? Like that's where you do cross the line when it comes to gambling. But when you are constantly seeing all these shows, especially when I go to Ireland and I'm watching Sky Sports, and it's like, oh, this program's presented to you by Sky Bet. This program's presented to you by Paddy Power, William Hill, all these sports books. Or even you just watch the typical NHL game and it's all these sports books coming up. And you're like, well, okay, come on. Like we're suspending players for doing the very activity that makes these sponsors and these sports books money. And it's not affecting their integrity in the game. They're not betting on their own teams in some cases. And they're still kind of towing that line, which to me is okay, especially when sports betting is just so heavily involved in everything now. Like to me, that's something that they do have to find the line with. We've seen it in the NFL, seen it in the NHL. I think it's come into baseball once or twice recently. And now we're seeing it in the Premier League and in other leagues as well, obviously in Italy too.
Yeah. 2 things before we close it out here. One, I was just looking through the league standings. I don't know how much you pay attention to outside EPL as well, but La Liga, the leaders are Girona. I don't know how to pronounce it properly.
Girona,
They're ahead of Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Atletico Madrid. And on the other side, on the Bundesliga, it's Bayer Leverkusen, which might not be as big of a surprise as Girona. But yeah, like those call eye-opening to me when I was just looking through the standings today before we were prepping for having you on.
Yeah, Girona's a team that, I've only watched them a couple of times this year. Like they have just the most motley crew out there for them, but they're getting the job done. And to be honest, like you watch them play, and offensively they are magnificent. Like they're just firing in the goals. And then you look at their underlying numbers just to see like, oh, well, is this actually sustainable? And look, I think attacking wise, it's going to slow down a little bit. They're maybe going to come down to earth slightly, but you still look at it. And when you look at their expected goals, like they're still on a pace to probably finish top 4, maybe top 5 at worst, and get that automatic Europa League spot. Like they've been that good this year.
Yeah.
And then over in Germany, Bayer Leverkusen, they're just so easy on the eye. And it's so typical that Xabi Alonso is the one to turn it around, because before he came in, they were a tire fire. He comes in and establishes his clear style of play. Victor Boniface has just come out of nowhere and has become one of Europe's informed strikers. I don't know how the hell that happened, but he's a quality player. They've got some really good pieces there, a lot of young players as well, many of whom I think are going to probably pique the interest of some of Europe's elite very soon, especially if they can keep on challenging Bayern at the top.
All right, last thing.
So Ballon d'Or, you predicted Haaland, we predicted Messi, and somehow Fabrizio Romano reported 2 days before the actual award ceremony that Messi won. So what is your reaction of the Ballon d'Or winner, and were you surprised?
No, not surprised, because I think I came on the show and I said, look, I'd have no problem if Messi won it. But when you look at the calendar year that Haaland had, winning a treble, breaking all these goal-scoring records, and yeah, he was in a Man City team that was otherworldly, but they've also had very solid teams in the past and never produced a goal scorer like that before, right? Sergio Aguero is probably the one who comes the closest, and even then, he never hit the heights Haaland hit. So that's why I went with him for my Ballon d'Or pick. But when you look at Messi, single-handedly dragging Argentina in some cases two-way World Cup, at the very least, kind of being the one to be like, all right, we need a lift. I'll be the one to kind of deliver that signature moment. And even at PSG, he was still one of the top assist providers in Europe. It's not his fault that they just choke every year in the Champions League. It doesn't seem to matter who's on the roster. So I don't have a problem with him winning it. I know a lot of people did. It's like, oh, it's just because they want to inflate his stats and he won the World Cup, so they're just handing him a Ballon d'Or. He still had a very good year. And it's all in the eyes of the voters, right? It's not too dissimilar to any other individual award that you see in any sport.
Those are either Ronaldo fanboys or fangirls and not much fans of the game, I guess you could say.
Oh, yeah.
they're yeah. Okay, very quickly, sorry. Early Ballon d'Or favorite, is it Jude Bellingham still for you? Because we talked about him last time.
At the ratings going, yeah, because he's the reason Real Madrid are really he single-handedly won them El Clasico. He has them fighting for the title in La Liga. They're definitely going to go through in the Champions League here and probably make another decent run, and he's really going to announce himself. I can't wait to see what he does at these Euros. Because listen, if England wins the Euros, first of all, stay off of Twitter. If England win the Euros, stay off of social media in general. If England win the Euros, but if they do, you imagine Jude Bellingham's probably going to play just as crucial of a role. So, and if he does, for sure, he's going to be a favorite to win the Ballon d'Or.
I think South people somehow mess that up because I don't hate England because of the England fans as much as some people do. I just hate the Southgate excuses and selections of why he's not selecting players and then contradicts himself. That's about it for me, at least.
Oh yeah.
All right, Peter, we appreciate you once again for hopping on with us, giving us the insight of the Canada soccer, having some fun conversation on who actually the GOAT is in Canada. Before we let you go, though, can you could once again promote your stuff, your podcast, your work to everybody watching?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back on. It was a lot of fun as always. And yeah, if you want to check out my work, as always, subscribe to Northern Football, wherever you get your podcasts. I do stuff for Sportsnet, One Soccer, pretty much anybody who will take my work, and I will post them on my Twitter account /X account, whatever you want to call it now. I refuse to call it that because it sounds so weird to me.
Still Twitter.
Always be Twitter. It will always be Twitter. Follow me there at Galindo PW. You'll see all those links and all the work that I put out there.
For sure, yeah. It will be all linked down below. And once again, for everybody, Peter, thank you for joining us, coming back on for us, and for everybody else watching. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.